10 people are dead and 15 injured in Turkey after a large explosion hit a central square near the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Syria needs to start working on a new constitution as a first step to finding a political solution to its civil war. And German Chancellor Angela Merkel says that Europe is, quote, vulnerable in the refugee crisis as protests erupt in Cologne. Good afternoon. Welcome to I-24 News. I'm Danny Swibel with your hour's top stories. At least 10 people are dead and 15 injured in Turkey after a large explosion hit a central square near the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, one of the major tourist areas of this city. According to Turkish television, ambulances are still at the scene. The cause of the blast is still unclear, but Turkish officials claim that terrorism is suspected. Natalie Carney, journalist from Istanbul, gave this report from the scene of the attack.
Well, as you mentioned, there are ambulance and police in the area. Much of the area has been cordoned off. What is usually a very busy area with tourists, with salesmen, shopkeepers, is relatively empty at the moment, other than security personnel. As you've mentioned, the explosion is said to have killed 10 people, as well as 15 people were injured. They are saying as well, hospital staff, that a lot of the injured are critical injuries, so there could be the fear that that death toll does rise as the hours go on. We haven't been given any details about the casualties, but we can suspect that it is likely that some would be tourists. Again, it is a very popular tourist area. We could hear earlier that there was a German tourist group who was very close to the area when the explosion occurred. Again, there's a lot of shopkeepers as well in the area, so I think it's safe to say that it's probably going to end up being a mix of both tourists and local Turkish businessmen that were caught up in this horrible situation.
And in an interview with Germany's Bild newspaper published on Monday, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Syria needs to start working on a new constitution as a first step to finding a political solution to its civil war, acknowledging the process was likely to be difficult. Putin, who has thrown Russian support behind Syrian President Bashar al-Assad with airstrikes, also said that the crisis in relations between regional rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran would complicate the search for peace in Syria. This comes on the heels of a December report from Amnesty International that Russian bombing of Syria may amount to war crimes due to the large number of civilians killed in strikes.
Concerning Syria, I think that it's necessary to move toward constitutional reform. Of course, it is a difficult process, and after that, on the basis of a new constitution, Syria should hold early presidential and parliamentary elections. Assad does not aim to exterminate the population of his own country. He fights against those who came there with arms in hands. And if civilian population suffers because of this, I think it is those who fight him with arms in hands who are responsible for that first of all, and those who help armed groups.
And we stay with Syria. The first trucks of aid entered the besieged Syrian town of Medea on Monday, where more than 24 people have reportedly starved to death, as the UN called for over 400 to be evacuated for medical treatment. The Syrian Arab Red Crescent said 44 trucks loaded with food and other aid entered the rebel-held town. Tamar Aziv has the latest.
An aid convoy entered the besieged Syrian town of Medea on Monday, where thousands are trapped, and the United Nations say people are starving to death. Red Crescent trucks carrying food and medical supplies traveling with UN vehicles entered Medea as part of an agreement between warring sides. At least 10 people are said to have died of starvation in the town, and activists say some inhabitants have been reduced to eating leaves.
Spoke to a father of 5 kids in Medea, and he said, like, we don't have any food. And they said, look, I heard you are eating grass. He said, yes, that was in the past, a few days ago. We don't have a grass anymore because of the snow, the grass gone. And I said, like, what are you eating? He said, literally, we boil water and we add some black peppers, salt, and some spices to make a meal for our kids. We don't have anything.
The UN said another convoy simultaneously entered 2 Shiite villages, Al-Fuwa and Kafraya, in the northwestern province of Idlib. Medea is besieged by pro-Syrian government forces, while the 2 villages in Idlib province are encircled by rebels fighting the Syrian government. The blockade of Medea has become a focal issue for Syrian opposition leaders, who told a UN envoy last week they wouldn't take part in talks with the government slated for later this month until it and other sieges are lifted. The US on Monday stated that it's pressing for full access to Medea.
Well, we need full access, and that's what we agreed on in the ISSG meeting in New York and the UN Security Council. And we're raising it with all parties right now. We're pressing for it very hard. It has to happen.
The nearly 5-year-old war in Syria has killed 250,000 people and left millions displaced in and outside of the country.
And German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that Europe was, quote, vulnerable in the refugee crisis because it was not yet in control of the situation and should fight to defend freedom of movement. Meanwhile, well over 2,000 anti-Muslim protesters took to the streets on Monday. Their ranks swelled by anger over the Cologne attacks. Maya Margit reports.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is under growing pressure to harden her line on refugees. The first extensive police report on the New Year's Eve violence in Cologne was published on Monday. More than 500 complaints were lodged with police, 40% of which were allegations of sexual assaults. Speaking Monday evening, Merkel admitted Europe was vulnerable.
All of a sudden, we are facing the challenge that refugees are coming to Europe and we are vulnerable, as we see, because we do not yet have the order and the control that we would like to have.
She also added that she would like to reduce the number of refugees arriving in Germany, which topped 1 million in 2015. But many are losing their patience with her open-door policy. In the eastern city of Leipzig, thousands of anti-Muslim Legida protesters took to the streets.
They need to go home, all of them, especially the young men who, it has to be said, want women. This type of fondling cannot continue.
These Muslim refugees have begun a generalized terrorist attack, an attack against German women, against white, blonde women.
19 suspects have been identified by police so far in the Cologne attacks, all of them foreigners. But although Merkel and Germany's interior minister have warned citizens against a backlash against refugees, the country is turning away a greater number of migrants every day. According to Austrian police, hundreds are being sent back to Austria at the German border because they have no valid documents or refuse to apply for asylum in Germany. This in the hopes of settling in Scandinavia instead.
And leaders of armed ethnic groups, government negotiators, and representatives of Myanmar's military joined in a meeting today to discuss the fragile peace process. This just days after Aung San Suu Kyi said it will be the priority for the new government. The I-24 News Desk has more.
Democratic icon Aung San Suu Kyi, along with hundreds of representatives of ethnic armed groups and lawmakers, are meeting in Myanmar's capital on Tuesday for peace talks.
This time, based on the mandate, it is right to do what the people want us to do. We are ready to take the responsibility of building forever peace. I hope everybody will help us.
The goal? To reach a ceasefire agreement to end the insurgencies that have plagued the country for decades. Myanmar's outgoing government already signed such a deal in October 2015, but several armed ethnic groups refused to participate, including some of the most powerful. Despite this, President Thein Sein has assured participants of a smooth handover of power after the 2015 election.
The holding of the Union Peace Conference is an indication that the political transition is moving ahead in a systematic and stable manner.
Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, or NLD, won a historic victory in last November's election, but her party will not take power until March this year. However, the Nobel laureate remains barred from becoming president under the military-drafted constitution, and the military remains a powerful political force. Myanmar's generals ran the country for 49 years, until 2011, when a hybrid civilian-military government was installed. The latest talks in the capital are expected to yield little in the way of concrete deals, but could lay the groundwork for negotiations once the NLD takes power.
And those were your latest headlines from I-24 News. Be sure to join us again in 20 minutes. Thank you for watching.